The emergency beacon from New Geneva cut out at 1432 Universal Time, leaving only static where 30,000 human voices had been moments before. Dr. Sarah Voss stared at the communication array in her Geneva laboratory, her xenopsychology training warring with the sick dread pooling in her stomach. The hegemony had made good on their ultimatum. "Kepler station is gone," whispered her assistant, Marcus Chun, his voice barely audible above the hum of quantum processors. "Hestia mining complex ... No response." Sarah's hands trembled as she accessed the colony networks. Red indicators cascaded. Across her screen, like digital blood, every human settlement beyond the solar system had gone dark within a 6-hour window. The hegemony's strike had been surgical, devastating, and absolute. Half of humanity's off-world population gone. The silence stretched for exactly 7 minutes. Then came the response. It wasn't broadcast from any military installation or government facility. It emerged simultaneously from every communication array on Earth, spoken by a voice that sounded like Sarah's own grandmother. "You have 72 hours to evacuate our space." Sarah's blood chilled. She'd studied the hegemony for 15 years, analyzing their psychological profiles, their military doctrine, their species composition. The coalition represented 14 different alien civilizations, each with technological capabilities that dwarfed humanity's. They had plasma weapons that could crack moons, bioships that could swallow entire fleets, and psionic weapons that could drive entire populations insane. But they had made one critical error. They thought humans were just another species. "Sarah," Marcus whispered, his face pale as milk, "look at the news feeds." She switched to global networks and felt her breath catch. Across Earth, something unprecedented was happening. In Tokyo, a grandmother stopped mid-sentence while feeding pigeons and tilted her head as if listening to a distant voice. In São Paulo, children playing in a park suddenly stood in perfect unison, their faces turning skyward. In the Sahara, Bedouin herders abandoned their camels and began walking toward the nearest settlement, their eyes reflecting an inner light. "They're all hearing it," Sarah breathed. "The message, but it's not coming through their ears." The phenomenon spread like wildfire through neural networks she didn't know existed. Every human on Earth, all 8 billion of them, received the same transmission simultaneously, not through technology, but through something far more primal. The message arrived as a feeling, a knowledge, a certainty that settled into their room. "Bones, they hurt our babies." Sarah's own mind reeled as the message hit her consciousness like a physical blow. Images flashed through her awareness, not her own memories, but collective ones. The first tentative steps of human explorers on distant worlds. The laughter of children born under alien suns. The pride of parents watching their offspring build impossible things in impossible places. And now, the devastating silence where those voices had been. The colonies weren't just settlements, she realized, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. They were our children, and Earth isn't just the homeworld, it's the parent. Marcus nodded, his eyes wide with growing understanding. And parents don't negotiate when their children are threatened. Outside her laboratory window, the transformation had already begun. The normally chaotic streets of Geneva moved with purpose now, streams of humanity flowing toward objectives only they understood. Scientists abandoned their lunches and returned to labs with expressions of deadly focus. Engineers pulled up blueprints for projects that had been theoretical yesterday. Even the children seemed changed. Their drawings on sidewalks now contained mathematical equations that made Sarah's quantum physicist colleagues weep with recognition. The hegemony had 72 hours to discover what they'd awakened. Dot and Sarah Voss, xenopsychologist, an unwitting witness to humanity's metamorphosis, had 72 hours to understand whether her species was about to save itself or damn the entire galaxy 30-6 hours after the transmission, Sarah stood in the underground facility that had materialized beneath CERN like a technological tumor. She'd watched it grow from nothing humans arriving with equipment that didn't exist the day before, tools that bent the laws of physics, and blueprints that read like poetry written in mathematics. How is this possible? She asked Dr. James Reeves, a physicist who'd spent the last day and a half working without sleep, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Yesterday, you were studying quantum fluctuations. Today, you're building weapons that could reshape space-time. James looked up from a device that hurt to look at directly, its surfaces folding in on themselves in ways that violated geometry. We always knew this. We just forgot we knew it. Like remembering a dream after waking. Sarah documented everything. With the desperate precision of someone who understood, she was witnessing history. Around her, humanity had become something else. Not alien more human than ever, but awakened to capabilities that had been dormant since the species' birth. The collective consciousness that had emerged wasn't a hive mind, but something far more sophisticated. A neural network of 8 billion individual minds, each contributing their unique perspective to a growing understanding of their situation. Children are the most remarkable, said Dr. Elena Vasquez, a child psychologist who'd arrived from Madrid that morning. 7-year-olds are solving equations that should take doctoral candidates months to work through. But they're not being taught, they're remembering. Sarah watched a group of children in the facility's common area, their innocent faces bent over tablets as they sketched designs that made the facility's engineers gasp with recognition. One little girl, barely 6, looked up at Sarah with eyes that held depths of knowledge no child should possess. "The bad people hurt our friends," the girl said simply. "So we're going to fix it." The innocence of the statement made Sarah's heart ache. These children were part of humanity's response to genocide, yet they spoke of it like repairing a broken toy. The horror of what the hegemony had done was filtered through humanity's collective unconscious and emerged as something both terrible and beautiful, the absolute conviction that family must be protected. "Dr. Voss," Marcus appeared at her elbow, his face grim. "You need to see this." He led her to a communication center where screens displayed data from across the galaxy. The information came from sources that shouldn't exist: human settlements that had been officially destroyed, monitoring stations that had never been built, observation posts that existed in quantum superposition. "We didn't just colonize those worlds," Marcus explained, his voice hollow with awe. "We changed them." Every human who set foot on an alien world carried microscopic organisms, not parasites, but partners. They've been dormant for generations, but now the screens showed the impossible. Across the galaxy, on worlds the hegemony called home, the very ground was turning against them. Plants withered. Atmospheric processors failed. Water supplies developed toxins that affected alien biology, but left human-compatible organisms untouched. The microscopic partners humanity had unknowingly spread were awakening, activated by the same signal that had unified Earth's population. "We've been terraforming their worlds without knowing it," Sarah whispered. "For how long?" "Since the first human left Earth," Marcus replied. "Maybe longer. The organisms exist in quantum states. They're not fully there until we need them to be." "But Sarah, there's more. The hegemony is trying to evacuate 17 worlds. Their populations are panicking. They're calling it the human plague." Sarah felt the weight of species-level responsibility settling on her shoulders. Humanity hadn't just been attacked, they'd been awakened. And their response was reshaping the galaxy in ways that even they didn't fully understand. "How long until they're ready?" she asked, gesturing toward the impossible weapons taking shape around them. "We've been ready for millennia," James answered without looking up from his work. We just needed someone to threaten our children, too. Remember how? The countdown continued, 36 hours remaining. But Sarah was beginning to understand that the real question wasn't whether humanity would survive the next day and a half dot. It was whether the galaxy would survive humanity's awakening. Asterisk 18 hours remained when the hegemony sent their second transmission. Sarah watched it arrive simultaneously across every human-built device in the galaxy, the alien voices harmonizing in a chord that spoke of species-level terror. We withdraw our ultimatum. We request immediate negotiation. We invoke the Galactic Accord of Non-Interference. Please respond. The response came not from Earth's governments or military installations, but from an 8-year-old girl in Mumbai who had been finger painting. When the message arrived, her voice, broadcast through quantum entanglement to every corner of human space, carried the weight of 8 billion minds. You killed our families. Now you want to talk? Sarah documented the exchange with hands that shook not from fear, but from the magnitude of what she was witnessing. The hegemony, a coalition that had conquered half the galaxy, was negotiating with a child. More accurately, they were negotiating with the species that had discovered its children were connected to weapons that could rewrite reality. The pattern is consistent across all affected worlds, reported Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a xenobiologist who'd arrived from Osaka 12 hours ago with knowledge she'd never studied. The microscopic organisms aren't just terraforming, they're operating according to principles we haven't discovered yet. They're turning the hegemony's own worlds into environments that support human life, while becoming increasingly toxic to the original inhabitants. Sarah studied the data streams flowing across her screens. The scope was staggering. 17 hegemony worlds were experiencing simultaneous environmental collapse, but the collapse followed patterns that suggested intelligence, purpose, and most disturbing of all, mercy. The organisms weren't killing the alien populations, they were forcing them to leave. It's like the worlds themselves are choosing us, she murmured. Not choosing, corrected Dr. Reeves, who had progressed from building impossible weapons to understanding impossible physics. Recognizing. The organisms respond to quantum signatures that exist in human consciousness. We're not infecting these worlds, we're completing them. The philosophical implications made Sarah's head spin. Had humanity been designed for this moment? Had evolution prepared them for galactic conflict on a scale that transcended individual biology? Or were they discovering that consciousness itself was a terraforming tool, capable of reshaping reality through collective will? Dr. Voss. Marcus interrupted her thoughts. The hegemony is requesting you specifically. Sarah blinked in surprise. Me? Why? You're the only human who spent significant time studying their psychological profiles. They want a xenopsychologist who understands their species composition. They're asking for help understanding what they've unleashed. The irony wasn't lost on her. The hegemony had attacked humanity to prevent them from becoming a galactic threat. Now they were begging the same species to explain how their genocide had triggered an awakening that was reshaping the very fabric of space-time. Put them through, she said. The holographic display flickered, revealing the familiar forms of the hegemony's ruling council, the crystalline Zephyrians, the gaseous veil dancers, the mechanically augmented forge masters, and 11 other species that had joined together to eliminate what they saw as an existential threat. Dr. Voss, the Zephyrian speaker's voice resonated through quantum harmonics. We require clarification. Your species' response to our ... action exceeds all projections. We eliminated significant portions of your colonial population. Standard. Psychological profiles suggested this would result in surrender or chaotic retaliation. Instead, you have achieved impossible technological advancement and are terraforming our worlds through mechanisms we cannot comprehend. Sarah felt the weight of 8 billion minds behind her consciousness, their collective knowledge flowing through her awareness like an ocean of human experience. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the air itself seem to listen. You made one mistake. You assumed we were like you, a species that expands to conquer, but we don't colonize worlds. We adopt them. Every human who steps on an alien world becomes part of a family that spans galaxies. And when you attack our family—" She paused, feeling the vast network of human consciousness focusing through her words. "You discover that Earth wasn't our homeworld, it was our nursery. And we've been growing up for a very long time." The Hegemony Council exchanged communications and frequencies that human ears couldn't detect, but Sarah's awakened consciousness could interpret their meaning. They were terrified. "What do you want?" the Zephyrian finally asked. Sarah smiled. And for the first time in her life, she understood exactly what humanity had always wanted. "We want our children back. All of them. And we want to make sure nobody ever hurts them again." 12 hours remained. The galaxy held its breath. The peace talks took place in a reality that existed between realities, quantum space constructed by human consciousness and maintained by technologies that had been theoretical 12 hours earlier. Sarah stood in what appeared to be a vast library, its shelves stretching into infinity and filled with books that contained the collective knowledge of every species in the galaxy. "This is impossible," whispered Zethys, the Hegemony's prime negotiator, her crystalline form refracting light that shouldn't exist. "Matter cannot maintain coherence in quantum superposition at this scale." "We're not maintaining matter," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the harmonics of 8 billion minds. "We're maintaining meaning. And meaning, it turns out, is more fundamental than physics." Around the negotiation table sat representatives of 14 alien civilizations, each grappling with the realization that their understanding of reality had been catastrophically incomplete. Across from them, Sarah stood alone, but she was never alone. Every human consciousness contributed to her awareness, creating a collective intelligence that dwarfed any individual mind. "Let me explain what you've discovered," Sarah began, her words reshaping the space around them. "Humanity isn't just a species. We're a process. Every world we've touched, every environment we've adapted to, every challenge we've overcome, it's all been preparation for this moment." She gestured, and the library around them filled with images. Humans taking their first steps on alien worlds, children playing in the light of distant suns, families building impossible things in impossible places. But beneath each image, quantum equations scrolled like poetry, showing the deeper truth. The microscopic organisms you call the human plague aren't parasites. They're our children, too. Quantum biological entities that exist in superposition until consciousness collapses them into reality. Every human who's ever lived has been unconsciously breeding them, preparing them, teaching them to recognize the quantum signature of human awareness. Forthic, the Forge Master representative, his mechanical augmentations sparking with incomprehension, spoke through synthesized vocals. "Your species has been preparing for galactic war for millennia without knowing it." "Not war," Sarah corrected. "Gardening. We've been turning the galaxy into a garden without realizing it, and you just tried to kill the gardeners." The implications cascaded through the assembled minds. The hegemony had attacked humanity to prevent them from becoming a galactic threat, but their attack had activated defenses that existed on a scale beyond individual worlds, beyond individual species, beyond individual dimensions of reality. 17 worlds experiencing environmental collapse, Sarah continued. They're not being destroyed, they're being prepared. The organisms are rewriting atmospheric compositions, soil chemistry, even quantum field fluctuations to support human consciousness. But they're not killing your people. They're making it clear that those worlds now belong to a different kind of family. "What do you want?" Zephy's asked again, her voice carrying harmonics of desperation. Sarah felt the collective consciousness of humanity flowing through her awareness. 8 billion minds considering the question with the weight of species-level decision-making. The answer, when it came, surprised even her. We want to understand what we've become, and we want to make sure it never happens again. The honesty of the statement resonated through the quantum space. Sarah could feel the alien minds struggling to comprehend a response that contained no demands for territory, no requirements for subjugation, no thirst for revenge. "You could take everything," Vorthik observed. "Your biological weapons could reshape every world in the galaxy. Your technological advancement could overwhelm any military force. Your quantum manipulation could rewrite the laws of physics themselves. Why negotiate?" "Because," Sarah replied, her words carrying the accumulated wisdom of human civilization, "we remember what it feels like to be children, and children shouldn't be afraid of their parents." The negotiation continued for hours that existed outside normal time. Agreements were reached not through diplomacy, but through the quantum entanglement of consciousness itself. The hegemony would withdraw from all human-claimed space. The 17 worlds would remain under human influence, but their original populations would be relocated to compatible environments. Most importantly, both sides would work together to understand what humanity had become and how to prevent future conflicts between species, operating on different scales of reality. "There's one more thing," Sarah said as the negotiations concluded. "The humans who died in your attack, they're not gone. Consciousness doesn't disappear. It transforms. We're going to need your help bringing them back." 6 hours remained, but Sarah was beginning to understand that time itself was about to become negotiable. The final hour arrived not with violence, but with wonder. Sarah stood in the quantum space that had once been her laboratory, watching reality reshape itself around humanity's collective will. The impossible had become inevitable. They were bringing their children home. "The quantum signatures are stabilizing," reported Dr. Reeves, his consciousness now interfacing directly with technologies that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. Every human who died in the hegemony attack left quantum echoes in the fabric of space-time. "We're not just rebuilding their bodies, we're reconstructing their entire existence." Sarah watched the process with awe that bordered on religious experience. Across the galaxy, on worlds that had been sterilized by alien weapons, reality itself was being rewritten. The microscopic organisms that humanity had unknowingly spread served as quantum anchors, holding the patterns of consciousness that should have been lost forever. "It's not resurrection," she realized. "It's remembering. The universe remembers every human who's ever lived, and we're teaching it to remember them back into existence." The first to return was Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, who had died defending New Geneva's orbital platform. She materialized not in the medical bay, but in the quantum space where the peace negotiations had concluded, her consciousness reforming from the accumulated quantum echoes of 8 billion human minds. "I never left," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself seem to celebrate. "I was just ... distributed, scattered across every human consciousness in the galaxy. And now I'm remembered back together." The process accelerated. Across 17 worlds, 30,000 humans began to exist again, not as they had been, but as they were meant to be. Their consciousness had been preserved in the quantum substrate of reality itself, maintained by the collective will of their species and anchored by organisms that existed in superposition until love collapsed them into existence. "The hegemony wants to observe," Marcus reported, his own consciousness now operating on scales that transcended individual biology. "They're requesting permission to document the process." "Let them," Sarah replied. "They need to understand what they're sharing the galaxy with." The alien observers arrived in ships that bent spacetime around their passage. Their instruments trained on phenomena that challenged every assumption about the nature of consciousness, reality, and death itself. What they recorded would reshape galactic civilization for millennia to come. But Sarah's attention was focused on something more immediate: the children. They were the last to return, their consciousness patterns more complex because they had been growing even in death. When they materialized, they brought with them knowledge that no living human possessed, an understanding of the quantum dimensions where consciousness resided between incarnations. "We saw everything," said a boy, who couldn't have been more than 7, his eyes reflecting depths that contained galaxies. The spaces between thoughts, the dreams that connect all minds, the places where love becomes physics. The final count was impossible. 30,000 humans had died in the hegemony attack. 30,000 had returned. But the beings who came back were more than human. They were humanity's first glimpse of what their species was becoming. This is only the beginning, Sarah realized, her consciousness now operating on scales that encompassed the entire galaxy. We're not just a species anymore. We're a process. A way for the universe to understand itself through love. The hegemony withdrew to their remaining worlds, carrying with them the knowledge that they shared the galaxy with beings who could rewrite reality through collective consciousness. But they also carried something else: the understanding that these beings, despite their impossible power, remained fundamentally human. Sarah stood in the quantum space that had become her new reality, watching her species take its first steps into a future that transcended the boundaries between life and death, between individual and collective, between human and cosmic. Around her, the children played games that involved manipulating probability itself while their parents worked on projects that would reshape the galaxy into a garden where consciousness could grow without fear. "What have we become?" she asked the universe. The answer came not from the stars, but from the laughter of children who had learned to paint with mathematics, and the tears of parents who had discovered that love was the most fundamental force in existence. We've become ourselves. Finally, completely, impossibly ourselves. The galaxy would never be the same. But then again, neither would humanity. And in the quantum spaces between heartbeats, Sarah Voss smiled and began to plan for the next phase of human evolution, one that would make the resurrection of the dead seem like a simple magic trick. The adventure was just beginning. Asterisk.